What's up, gamers? Dreamcastguy here, talking today about Cyberpunk 2077 because this has been a game that's definitely been very controversial. From the botched launch, to the glitches, to the debate among reviewers and stuff. It's a game that's pretty much stirred up every dark corner of the gaming industry, but I think the thing that's been the most curious is the confusion about it. This is CD Projekt Red. This is the company that makes some of the biggest and best and most beloved games of all time. So how did it go wrong? How did they go from a game that seemed to have some of the most action-packed awesome trailers to a game that could hardly run on a standard Xbox One? Well, we may have the answers to that at last. This is a giant freaking article that was just dropped by Jason Schreier. Well, technically he dropped it at 11 p.m. last night on a Friday. Look, Jason, I don't know what's going on in your personal life. I think you have a wife. Why are you working at 11 p.m., bro? But anyways, I decided to wake up and read his article. And pretty much every part of this is crazy, from a fake E3 demo to the fact that the developers were fighting against management, people on the team didn't speak the same language, so they couldn't even work on the same art. Like, the game is such a mess from the ground up. So what I wanted to do today is read this article. It's pretty long, so this is going to be a crazy video, but I really think we need to kind of examine just how bad Cyberpunk went, because I do think that this game still has an opportunity to improve itself. I do think that whenever the DLC is done and the game's getting its final patches and stuff, I think this game is going to be great. But I'm personally fascinated about how they managed to walk down this rocky road, how they became the anthem of 2020. Now let's take a look at it. This article actually starts off with this weird statement that just came out. I watched this came out 72 hours ago, so 3 days ago, the president, one of the main guys over at CD Projekt Red, released this very weird statement where he's just like, oh man, I can't believe that the game wasn't done, was so sorry. Now, this is interesting, and a lot of people actually got upset about this, but mostly game developers, because in this, he says that the game was a broken mess, they admit that there was problems and stuff, but they claim that their QA department, which are the bug-finding crew, they just didn't see the errors. He claims, this is the guy in charge of the freaking game, he just claims, you know what? We played the game internally for years, and we just didn't see the bugs that you guys saw. It was just an accident. So that seems kind of like BS. This statement, it seems a little bit like a lie. But speaking of the lies, let's get into the article itself. Now, he just starts out by outlining that Iwinski's apology, the second within a month, was an attempt to restore the Polish company's reputation with scores of fans and investors who had waited 8 years for the game, only to discover it was riddled with bugs and performance issues when it was released. Uproar over the botched debut caused a 30% drop in CD Projekt Red shares. Now, even if you don't care about finance stuff, this basically means that they lost billions of dollars. Now, that's why they're having to make these apologies. That's why they're trying to damage control. They're not just doing this to try and make people happy. Right now, they are geysering money. Their company's value itself is just going beep, and they're trying to upswing that. Now, getting back to the article itself, interviews done with more than 20 current and former CD Projekt Red staff, most of whom requested anonymity as not to risk their careers, depict a development process marred by unchecked ambition, poor planning, technical shortcomings. Employees discussing the game's creation for the first time describe a company that focused on marketing at the expense of development. Now, I don't think anybody's shocked by that. Hearing this statement, it's pretty obvious that the thing that they wanted to try and show most was bright, flashy trailers and stuff to make sure they got your pre-order bucks. But it's crazy to realize that they were worried about trailers over even gameplay inside the studio itself. They had an unrealistic timeline that pressured some into working extensive overtime long haul for the final push. CD Projekt Red declined for a comment statement during the process of this story. Yeah, of course. So basically, anytime there's a journalist like this that's writing up a big story, out of journalistic integrity, they email the studio and say, hey, I have all this evidence that your game was bad. Do you have a statement? And they're usually like, yes, I have a statement. It's right here. There we go. All right. The Polish company will spend the next few months working on fixes to Cyberpunk 2077 instead of planning expansions for the game or getting started on the next installment of the popular franchise The Witcher. Because yes, there is rumors that the next game is going to be Witcher 4. I think they said something already alluding to that, but now whenever Witcher 4 was going to come out, it's probably going to be in 10 years because there is a lot of Cyberpunk years ahead. The first few updates will be released towards the end of January, and second in the weeks after, Iwinski said. So that's the updates they're going to be trying to fix the game as it currently stands. This wasn't how the development team envisioned starting in 2021. Now, instead of celebrating a successful release, they aim to turn Cyberpunk into a redemption story. It will be an uphill battle. Unlike competitions such as Electronic Arts and Ubisoft, CD Projekt Red releases only one major project every few years, so the company was relying on Cyberpunk to be a significant hit. This is the biggest thing. I have a chance to talk to a lot of game developers and a lot of really interesting indie studios and stuff, and something they tell me a lot is that the bigger you are, the easier it is to fail. Like, a lot of times, tiny little indie studios will tell me, like, all right, we have 10 employees, so if we sell even 10,000 copies of our game, we can live on that for a couple years and make a couple games in between. And if some of them suck or some of them sell, we're fine because financially we have such a tiny team. Whereas a company like this that has hundreds and hundreds of employees and a giant freaking studio built over in Poland and stuff, if their game is not an absolute freaking banger, they can go financially bankrupt. Now, I do think they're fine, but this does mean that there is a higher risk and higher reward for every project that manages to win or fail. Cyberpunk 2077, a role-playing game set in a sci-fi dystopia, had a lot going for it. Warsaw-based CD Projekt was already well known for an earlier blockbuster title, The Witcher 3, and Cyberpunk benefited from a massive ad blitz, leading to a role by actor Keanu Reeves. Thanks to pre-launch hype, the game sold 13 million copies at $60 a piece in the first 10 days after release. God, that's absolutely insane. They sold 13 million copies of Cyberpunk. 13 million! That's got to be so many records. God, it's so insane. CD Projekt was, for a while, the most valuable company in Poland. I do like that they had the Keanu Reeves coming out and welcoming the fans that are freaking out. Early reviews were really good, but once players got their game in their hands, they realized it had problems on PC and was almost unplayable on consoles. It performed so poorly that Sony removed the game from the PlayStation Store and offered refunds. An unprecedented move. Now again, this is part of the conversation. Like, sometimes people say, Dreamcastguy, why are you even making these Cyberpunk videos? Just play the games. Because honestly, I am fascinated by this mess. It has taken so many hundreds of tiny mistakes to get to this place. This entire dumpster fire is just such a unique mess that I truly believe it may never happen again. This is such a perfect storm of screw-ups and missed release dates and rushed timelines and confusion that I am fascinated by just how badly this game managed to break. And the fact that they released it in such a strange state, knowing, like, this game originally started development on the old school systems. This was made for the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. So the fact that it runs decently on my Xbox Series X, it runs okay on my PlayStation 5 sometimes, but the fact that it was actually made for last-gen tech is baffling to me, because obviously it is just in such an errorist state. But getting back to it, they've been facing investor calls that are angry. They actually currently have a lawsuit because of the claims that they had misled people. Yeah, that's right, so they're getting sued as well. In his message, Iwinski concedes that the company underestimated the task. He said because the game city was so packed and the disk bandwidth of old consoles is what it is, it constantly challenged us. While the company extensively tested the game's release, Iwinski said that they didn't show many of the issues players experienced. So straight up, this is him claiming, we just didn't see the bugs, guys. I'm sorry, I was just making my game. I didn't see nothing. And then, here's what's really funny. The developers who worked on the game talked to Bloomberg and said, yeah, we were constantly showing them bugs. Like, that was our job. Of course, we were constantly going, hey, look at this. Hey, look at this weird bug. Hey, look at this weird bug. And management just didn't care. That is so baffling to me. Cyberpunk was an ambitious project by any standard. CD Projekt Red's previous success, The Witcher, was set in a medieval fantasy world full of swords and spells, but everything in Cyberpunk was a departure from that framework. Cyberpunk 2077 was an ambitious project by any standard. CD Projekt Red's previous success, The Witcher, was set in a medieval fantasy world full of spells and swords, but everything in Cyberpunk was a departure from that framework. Cyberpunk is obviously science fiction rather than fantasy. Instead of being third person, it's first person. Cyberpunk, pretty much everything about this they had to completely redo. This is all new stuff. They say it needed new technology, new staff, which means that they were hiring people they'd never worked with before, and new techniques that they hadn't explored. So yeah, this just sounds like a mistake. It sounds like a recipe for destruction. Another indication of how CD Projekt stretched things too far was that it tried to develop the engine technology behind Cyberpunk, most of which was brand new, simultaneously with the game, which slowed down production. One member of the team compared the process to trying to drive a train while the tracks are being laid in front of you at the same time. It might have gone more smoothly if the track layers had a few months head start. That is bonkers. I mean, that definitely explains stuff. There's been a lot of videos actually showing very funny glitches in Cyberpunk, from exploding cars and faces that aren't loading and characters that follow you around when they're not supposed to. And I think that this is partly because of this engine trouble. The fact that they were actually trying to create the physics and the programming and the quest coding while also trying to write the quests and make the guns go pew pew. That's fascinating to me. Like, okay, this entire thing's a mess. This story is very, very negative, but God, it is so fascinating that they managed to screw this game up so badly and still release it. Anyways, Adrian Jubak, oh god, I'm so bad at these names, Jakubak, a former audio programmer for CD Projekt, said one of his colleagues asked during a meeting how the company thought it would be able to pull off a technically more challenging project in the same time frame as The Witcher. Someone answered, "We'll figure it out along the way." For years, CD Projekt Red has thrived off that mentality, but this time the company wasn't able to pull it off. "I knew it wasn't going to go well," said Jakubak. "I just didn't know how disastrous it would be. Part of the fans' disappointment is proportional to the amount of time that they spent waiting for the game. Although Cyberpunk was announced in 2012, the company is then mainly focused on its last title, and full development didn't start until 2016. Are you guys actually processing that? Cyberpunk did not even begin development until 2016. They had teaser trailers, they were doing interviews, they were talking about the game, but they didn't have any coding, probably. They didn't have any actionable focus on it until 2016. That was when CD Projekt Red essentially hit the reset button, according to people familiar with the project. Studio head Adam Badowski took over as director, demanding overhauls to Cyberpunk's gameplay and story. For the next year, everything was changing, including fundamental elements like the gameplay perspective. Top staff who'd worked on The Witcher 3 had strong opinions about how Cyberpunk should be made, which Badowski led to the development departure of several... Wait. Do I actually understand this? They're hinting gameplay. I think that they're just hinting right here that the game originally was third person. The original prototype of Cyberpunk was probably third person, like Witcher 3 was. That's fascinating. And Badowski said, screw that, it's got to be a first person shooter. That is fascinating. Holy heck. I wonder if people would have liked it more. I mean, it's so difficult to try and assume what people would and won't want about a game that's never going to exist now, but hopefully someday we do get that third party or third person view back. That is so fascinating to me. Much of CD Projekt Red's focus, according to several people who worked on Cyberpunk, was impressing the outside world. A slice of gameplay showcased at E3 in 2018, it showed the main character embarking on a mission and giving the players a grand tour of the seedy crime city of Night City. Fans and journalists were wowed by Cyberpunk's ambition and scale. What they didn't know was that the demo was almost entirely fake. CD Projekt Red hadn't finalized the code underlying the gameplay systems, which is why so many features such as car ambushes were missing from the final product. Developers said that the demo was a waste of months that should have gone into making the game. The demo was fake. The demo was fake. This is insanity to me. So let's just be clear about that. A lot of the stuff that you saw, the people who were the most hyped to get in line and put cash down about Cyberpunk, you were lied to. Anybody who gets upset about the fact that I'm going to put lie in the title of this video, they lied to you. Like, they lied to you. I enjoyed my time with Cyberpunk. I still enjoyed my playthrough of it. It's a decent freaking game. It was a cool time blasting stuff, but the more I hear about the stuff behind the scenes, the more it's clear that CD Projekt Red, like, they'll do anything to get your dollar. That is absolutely bonkers. Employees were working long hours, even though Iwinski told staff that overtime wouldn't be mandatory on CD Projekt. More than a dozen workers said they felt pressured to put in extra hours by their managers or coworkers anyways. There were times when I would crunch up to 13 hours a day. A little bit over that was my record probably. Jesus, so that means sometimes they were working 14, 15 hours a day. And I would do that 5 days a week, said Jakubak. Oh, I'm so sorry I'm slaughtering this guy's name. I appreciate him giving these statements. He's probably going to get in trouble for talking about this, so I do apologize I'm getting his name wrong. The former audio programmer, adding that he quit the company after getting married. I have some friends who lost their families because of these sort of shenanigans. There are literally people who are single right now because of Cyberpunk. Really let that mentally sink in as we continue here. The overtime didn't make development for the game any faster. At E3 in June 2019, CD Projekt Red announced that the game would come out April 16, 2020. Fans were elated, but internally, some members of the team could only scratch their heads, wondering how they could possibly finish the game by then. One person said that they thought the date was a joke. Based on the team's progress, they expected the game to be ready in 2022. Development teams created memes about the game being delayed, making bets on when it would happen. Now, this is an extra important date because 2022, they're talking about that in 2019. That was before the pandemic, which means that by current standards, since they were working at home and stuff, this game was probably scheduled to be released in maybe 2023. Oh, that's absolutely bonkers. Canceling features and scaling down the size of Cyberpunk's Metropolis helped, but the team's growth hampered some departments, developers said. While Witcher 3 was created with roughly 240 in-house, according to the company, Cyberpunk's credits show the game had well over 500 internal developers. But because CD Projekt wasn't accustomed to such a size, people who worked on the game said the teams often felt siloed and unorganized. I've heard about this before, which is just when your company is so big, you have a boss and a boss and a boss above you. So if you have like a major development question, you need to try and figure out, all right, how's this car supposed to look? How are these quest systems going to interlock? You can't even get a question answered. So I definitely feel bad. I want to make it extra clear right here. While I am talking about this game, while I am kind of bagging on the development, I am not at all trying to insult the developers themselves. The people who worked on this game, the people that are sitting at desks, probably even now on a freaking Saturday in Poland, I genuinely salute you guys. This is not an easy task. It's so obvious that you guys are doing your very best. The voice acting in this game is pretty top notch. I still think that the writing in this game is fantastic. I sympathize with your guys' game. I mean, it's a broken mess right now, but I genuinely sympathize with what you guys are trying to deal with. It's the management and not you bros. At the same time, CD Projekt Red remained understaffed. Games like Grand Theft Auto 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2 were often upheld as the examples of the quality of the game they wanted to get, which those were made by dozens of offices and thousands of people. Now, this is especially interesting because there is the criticism pretty often that some people say that this, Cyberpunk kind of looks like a clone of Grand Theft Auto. It's funny that they were telling their staff, make Grand Theft Auto. There were cultural barriers brought on by hiring expats to the US and Western Europe. The studio mandated that everybody speak English during meetings with non-Polish speakers, but not everyone followed the rules. So what this is saying is they were bringing in the best programmers they could from Europe and the US, and they were flying them into Poland because that's where the game is being made, and sometimes they were just having meetings in Polish. It was like, sorry guys, if you have to take any notes, tough luck. Even as the timeline looked increasingly unrealistic, management said that delaying it wasn't an option. Their goal was to release Cyberpunk before the new consoles from Microsoft and Sony, expected in the fall of 2020, were even announced. That way, the company could launch the game on existing PlayStation 4s and Xbox Ones, and then double dip by releasing versions down the road for the next generation. People who bought the old versions would get a free upgrade to the new ones. Oh my god, some engineers realized that Cyberpunk was too complex of a game to run well on 7-year-old consoles. With its city full of bustling crowds and hulking buildings, they said management dismissed their concerns, citing the success of Witcher 3. It's so funny to me that everybody actually working on the game, everybody in the studio trying to make sure that this would work as smoothly as possible, was saying, bro, this ain't gonna work on my freaking Xbox. It's only gonna work on next gen. It's fascinating to me that the management just said, shut up, bro. Keep working on it. We'll just Witcher it. Holy heck, what a disconnected bunch of egomaniacs. By the end of 2019, management finally acknowledged that Cyberpunk needed to be delayed. Last January, the company pushed the game's release date into September. In March, as the pandemic began ravaging the globe and forcing people to stay inside, CD Projekt Red staff had to complete the game from their homes. Without access to the office's console development kits, most developers would play builds of the game on their home computers. So it wasn't clear how it might run on PS4 and Xbox One. External tests, however, showed clear performance issues. Oh my god, that makes so much sense. They were straight up playing it on developer PCs and it worked pretty well, and they're like, okay, well, theoretically this will work on a PlayStation 4, right? Right? This is the last couple paragraphs here, and I really think it kind of sums up just how crazy this entire freaking colossal of a mess was. Awansky said the communication issues resulting from teams working at home amid COVID-19 restrictions meant a lot of the dynamics we normally take for granted got lost over video calls or emails. The game's debut slipped again to November. Now, this is something I've actually personally talked to developers about, which is that working on a game is very much like friends hanging out. A lot of times the best ideas and biggest problems are solved accidentally. Like one of the examples I was given is, if you write on a board, we don't know how to make the storyline end, and then some guy is walking past your office and sees that written on a board, he might pitch an idea of, okay, maybe instead of fighting this giant robot, we become the giant robot and kill all these other guys instead. Like, there is a natural rhythm to game development that a lot of times we don't get a chance to see. And when you're working from home, that completely dissolves. A lot of times the problem solving and the systematic building up of new ideas, it does get diluted. So I am, again, sympathetic to the fact that this is just kind of a bad situation, but it definitely exacerbated the problems with this game that clearly already existed. As the launch date drew closer, everyone at the studio knew the game was in rough shape and needed more time, according to several people familiar with the development. Chunks of dialogue were missing, some actions didn't work properly. When management announced in October that the game had gone gold, that was ready to be pressed onto discs, there were still major bugs being discovered. The game was delayed another 3 weeks as exhausted programmers scrambled to fix as much as they could. Jesus. When Cyberpunk did finally launch on December 10th, the backlash was swift and furious. Players showed videos of screens overrun with tiny trees or characters gallivanting without pants, compiled list of features that had been promised that were not the final product. Many of the glitches and graphical issues can be fixed, developers say, though it's not clear what it'll take to regain their spot on the PlayStation Store. Winning back fans may be difficult, but there's a precedent because games have managed to do it, like No Man's Sky, Final Fantasy XIV, and Destiny. Can they do it? I guess that's my major final thoughts. I'm somebody that's played a lot of different games that managed to do a comeback. I'm still not the biggest fan of No Man's Sky, but they did manage to repair it to a very heavy degree. Final Fantasy XIV, I still think that Final Fantasy XIV is one of the best games ever, and that was something that had to be completely restarted development after it was released. So can they do that with Cyberpunk? Can they actually inject enough magic and enough passion and enough freaking oomph to get this game back up to a playable state? I'm still hopeful. What I'm curious about now is, over the course of the next couple months, we're going to start getting the free DLCs, the expansion packs that are probably going to be extra quests. And during that, I do think that we might just see other features coming back. Hopefully the glitches get fixed and stuff, and then after the DLCs, they've released a timeline that said that we're going to be getting, the last thing we're getting is the free next-gen updates. But how's this all going to turn out? Hopefully for the best. But what do you think? This is maybe the longest video I've ever made in my freaking life, but I wanted to actually read every word of this article to actually perfectly explain why this mess has happened, and I think now we can finally put Cyberpunk to bed. No more leaks, no more rumors, the truth is finally here, and it's pretty freaking bad. Thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already, but do me the biggest favor of all, and keep dreaming. I am filming this before I had my breakfast, before I've even had my freaking Red Bull. My Red Bull is full. I appreciate you guys watching. I love you guys very much. Have a good weekend, and I think it's a holiday on Monday, so chill out, relax, have a good time. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.